Just let me know.
Cool. Okay. So thank you everyone for coming to this session in the Advocacy Institute. This is session 4, which is crazy that we're on 4. But this session, Janine gets to take a break, which she's really excited about and is super deserved. So the folks who are leading this session are actually the Advocacy Committee of the Women's Fund of Greater Chattanooga. So the Advocacy Committee is a kind of a longstanding committee of the Women's Fund that is composed of people who are on the board and also people who are in our community who are interested in the advocacy work of the Women's Fund. So I would say that by and large, most of the folks who become a part of the Advocacy Committee just have a great interest in learning more about the Women's Fund's advocacy work. Some folks came to the Advocacy Committee with a certain skill set in that area, and some people came just because they were interested in it and wanted to learn. And hopefully, through working with the Advocacy Committee, feel like they had the opportunity to improve their skills in that area and also just learn more about the Tennessee legislature. In our meetings, we talk about policy and things that are going on, but people who are involved in our advocacy committee also have the opportunity to be more involved in our advocacy work kind of day to day. I'm the chair of the advocacy committee, so I'm really just kicking us off. And each of these 4 bullet points that we have on here today are going to be walked through by actually a different member of our advocacy committee. All really wonderful volunteers who offered to take this on and talk a little bit about their own advocacy experience. And I think the goal of having some different voices in the mix today and from hearing from the advocacy committee is just to reinforce the fact that you don't have to be a person who does this for your job or has that, again, that special skill set or background in it to become an advocate. There's so many opportunities to do it day to day, but then also the people who are involved in the Women's Fund's work, they really come to it, again, just because they have an interest and a willingness to learn more. So that's kind of what we're here to do today, is to help you guys learn a little bit more about the things that the people on our advocacy committee have all done to become advocates and things that you can do either as a part of the Women's Fund or outside of the Women's Fund if there are other issues that you care about. So I'm going to kick it over first to Monika, who's going to talk about how to educate yourself.
Okay, let's see. Okay, can you all see and hear me okay?
Yeah, we can.
Okay, great. Okay, so I am Monika Patel, a doctor of physical therapy here in Chattanooga, both orthopedics and pelvic health. And essentially, I started this journey on educating myself on social justice issues and learning a lot more about the legal system for the last 2 years, based on a personal experience of mine, which I'll share more in a second. But as I reflected on, what did educating myself really look like throughout the last 2 years, I put together this flow chart. And not that it's the only way or the right way or anything to get to know, how to be an advocate for yourself, for your community, but it does kind of I wanted to share in order to help let you know that it can take some time and it can evolve over time, and one thing can lead to another. So I kind of started with a personal experience, and then I started researching, asking a lot of questions. I engaged with some local organizational support as well as national organizational support. And, from there, I learned a lot, thanks to the Women's Fund, about legislative and policy change process. And then I kind of connected what I found to the Women's Fund, who are experienced policy change makers. So if we go to the next slide, then I'll elaborate even more. So from a personal experience standpoint, I entered into the legal system and just trying to get a divorce from a very unhealthy relationship. And I experienced economic abuse both during the marriage and hereafter. And just the frustration and the sadness that a lot of that wasn't really recognized within the legal system itself really left me kind of looking for answers and asking a lot of questions. Also with the feeling of wanting to turn somewhat of a painful experience into one that others would not then have to feel after the fact. So I started asking a lot of questions. Did any organizations offer financial support for people who experienced interpartner violence? How were judges educated on the topic? What protections are in place for people who had experienced economic abuse? And then I even asked, some even a more emotionally less specific questions like, why does this feel so hard? And what steps can be taken to prevent anyone else from feeling that way? And so through that, those question asking, I would read articles, I joined Facebook groups for, people who had experienced similar things to myself from all over the nation. I read books, I went to the library and researched. And then, through that, and through the connection through the Women's Fund, I learned that this experience was not unique in and of to myself. Tennessee specifically ranks 49th, or it did, I think it might have moved up a little bit, worst overall state for well-being of women, and 21st worst when it comes to survivor financial security out of the whole 50 states. And so that information to me was really disheartening, for one, because you don't want anyone to have hardship or anything, but also it just kind of clicked in my brain of like, oh, wow, okay, this is something we really, really need to work on as a culture. And so do you mind so in taking that information, I found two organizations that really, really resonated with me and where I was in my specific journey toward educating myself about how to improve my own situation as well as the situation for others. One was a group called Free From. They are based out of California, and their whole mission is to do research on survivors and of interpartner violence and support them in their economic journey through support groups, through education, through financial literacy, through scholarship opportunities. I'll show you here in just a second some of the research that they did that I then was able to connect to the Women's Fund. And the Women's Fund was helpful in that it was exciting to me to connect with an organization that, one, was great at listening to individual voices, as well as the voices of representatives, and really was acting in ways that promoted positive change making, despite so many injustices and seemingly insurmountable obstacles within the legal system itself. And so both organizations really were very proactive and both great listeners, which I think as someone who experienced interpartner violence, like the act of another organization truly listening to your story and respecting it felt very empowering. So let's jot over to the next slide real quick. Because I wanted to share some from a research standpoint, and I know this is a specific topic in and of itself, but it does illuminate how the pieces all came together here. The Free From organization put together a financial security policy scorecard, just looking at all the different states in the country and who really recognizes economic abuse as a form of domestic violence. And on the right there are all the different ways that they measured this. And if you see at the very top that Tennessee only has some level of accountability compared to some states that are, there's 0 model states in this, which is sad, but I liked how they showed that, 2 states are are financially security friendly, 11 are taking steps, and then that 17, some level of accountability, and 21 states few level. So, with Tennessee ranking in that some accountability, I forwarded this information from Free From to the Women's Fund of Chattanooga. And they looked at this list and, kind of pairing a little bit of the details of my story along with the fact that this first part of the rubric here of like, in Tennessee, economic abuse is not even defined as a part of domestic violence, then the Women's Fund kind of latched onto that and said, if we're going to make things truly better for people going forward in this topic that obviously needs a lot of work, why don't we work on getting the definition in place first? And so the Women's Fund took it on to write a bill to include economic abuse as part of the definition of domestic violence. And as I've learned, that's not an easy task. It takes a lot of time and energy to make sure the language is okay within that bill, to get sponsors within our state leadership to then kind of represent it throughout the legislative season. And, it takes people making calls during the legislative season to say, hey, this bill is really important. And here's why. And as someone who did that last February, it felt really great to actually, when I was in a place of struggle and hurt, to pick up the phone and be like, hey, here's an issue that people have taken on and I support it. And it was really gratifying for me to be in a place of feeling very helpless to actually do a very small 30-second action that did seem to be creating positive momentum for issues that I had either experienced or read about and or been educated on thanks to the Women's Fund. So you can go to the next slide. So educating yourself can look like many things. There's the kind of classic suggestions of keeping up to date with local issues and watching and reading the news. The Women's Fund has been a really great resource for me. I know that reading the news and things like that can sometimes be prohibitive to positive action because it can feel overwhelming. And so one thing I've really been encouraged by in this whole process is really just taking my own observations and looking at room for improvement within our community and within the legal system. And then kind of taking those observations and then researching them for ideas of what other places and policies are around the country and comparing them and giving different organizations kind of a realistic benchmark to help reach for really seemed to resonate with me. But really just observation and voicing your personal experience to people who are willing to listen, I've learned does actually make a difference. And it can be easy to belittle yourself and what you have educated yourself on, but it really does make a difference, because I'm really excited to share that the Women's Fund has managed to get sponsors for including economic abuse as part of domestic violence, and that will be on the table this season. So it's really exciting to have experience pain and see it and a gap within the legal system as far as covering people who aren't necessarily always going to have a strong voice within the legal system and add a fighting chance. So I'm happy to talk individually with anyone who has any questions later, but that's basically my journey.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. And will you remind me how you say your name?
Monika.
Monika. Okay. Monika, just thank you so much for starting us off that way. I just had while you were talking, it made me so excited because what you were saying is exactly the process in which my mind was going when I'm saying, if we're going to talk about educating others next, that's what you did when you educated the Women's Fund. You said, look at this research I've done and there's something to share, right? And it's going to empower women in the whole state of Tennessee, because that's something that you learned and then took forward to someone else. And so that's kind of what we're going to transition into is, whatever that cause is that we all have close to us, you're educating yourself on it. And what are we going to do with that? So that's kind of what we're going to talk about next. So if you go to the next slide, Teo, there's just a few things that I guess I wanted to share with y'all and say that's close to my heart as well. But the first one is know your why. Know your why about why you're sharing something with someone. And oftentimes it's with the people that you love. So I just say, like, who do you want to educate? Really, hopefully it's the people that are around you, the people you spend your time with, right? If you've learned something that's enlightened you, that you're passionate about, you're going to want to share that with the people that you love. And often the most influence we have is with those people that are right next to us. So with that, you don't have to know everything in order to educate others. And I think that that's something to hold very close because, as you all know, whatever the topic is, things change. There's more research. It's really important to have an open mind. And we have really wise people that do research in so many different areas. And so when we go looking to educate ourselves, it's important that we continue to do that, even as we think about educating others, because someone might have information to help educate us further, whether that's through their learned experiences or through their own work. So it's kind of fun, I think, educating others, because it's not that you're just educating others. Oftentimes they're educating you as well. So it doesn't have to be a huge conversation or scary. Hopefully it's not, but you can take small steps always. With that as well, I think it goes hand in hand to talk about uplifting others' voices. I think Monika did a great job of uplifting her own voice when she needed to advocate for her cause. But also, if I don't have a lived experience within that topic, I can still be passionate about it. But I might use that time to uplift somebody else's voice who has experienced those things and who might not already be heard. So before we go on, I guess the other person that we can educate, and something that Janine is doing and Monika is doing with this most recent bill, is educating public officials. So going to public meetings, having an avenue to share the research and share the opportunities with people who are in places of power is really important. So that looks like linking arms with one another and trying to get that message out. So that could be at public meetings, that could be taking action, going to Nashville, different things like that. So Teo, you can go to the next slide. Awesome. And then I kind of wanted to leave you all with just a few other things that are really tangible. And as a part of the advocacy committee, I find something that I like to try to incorporate in my everyday life. So hopefully you can take a little bit of that with you. Advocacy action meetings are what happens during legislative session when we have the opportunity to track bills and progress of what's going on in the legislature. And we can tell our local legislators and other legislators how we feel about bills, whether we do or do not support them, if they are going to promote the well-being of women and children. So we are very well prepared. Oftentimes I can't always keep up with everything, but the Women's Fund is always really wonderful to keep us in the loop about what's going on. So those advocacy action meetings are great to get together with like-minded people and have our voices heard. So we're receiving education from Janine and the team, but also educating the representatives that we speak to when we make calls. The next thing is bringing relevant things that we've learned into the workplace. That's been really helpful for me. I work at the YMCA and I work as a director of mission advancement. And it looks like lots of different things, but thankfully it means that I'm allowed to sit in on meetings that some others wouldn't get to and help with strategic planning and help uplift other people's voices. So it's really helpful for me to know what's going on, what people are struggling with, what other organizations are doing, and also what's going on in the way of policy. And I think that can only make our YMCA better and our organizations and businesses that we work for better if we can bring in some of that knowledge and how it impacts us personally and impacts the system that we're all a part of. And lastly, I think we've talked about this quite a bit as an advocacy committee, and it was interesting for me to kind of circle back around, but it's about integrating intersectional language and ideas. And I think that me personally, I've had to think hard about doing this just in my everyday life. And it's brought up conversations with my family that don't understand why I use the pronouns that I use now, not personally, but for when I refer to other people. And so it brings up conversations, right? So the way that I change my learning and enact the things I've learned in my life, allow other people to ask me questions. And so I think being open to having other people question you and is really important, because it is about learning together. So that's mostly what I wanted to share. And I have 3 little steps, and then I'm going to pass it on to Leanne. So I just wanted to remind you guys to know your why, to activate your voice or uplift someone else's voice. That could be sending an article, I like to send podcasts to people because I always have to listen to something when I drive. So I love that podcasting has given people a platform to have their voice heard, because I've learned so much from people in that way. And then lastly, listen and ask questions. So as you're having these discussions or sharing about something that you have learned and that you care about, and that you are going through, just be willing to have a conversation about it. Everyone can know when you're trying to change their mind. So you might as well be upfront about why you want to share your why with them. So thanks for letting me be a part of today. I hope that you learned a little bit, and I'll pass it on to Leanne.
All right, thank you so much. Well, I feel like I would just announce this at the very beginning. I'm a newbie to all of this, and I feel like the people that I'm learning from, that you all are learning from tonight, are giants in my opinion. So I'm just want to say that to begin with, that I'm a newbie to all of this, which is actually great for everyone, because what better place to start than at the beginning? So first of all, a little bit about me, because I think a lot of people don't know me. My name is Leanne Willis. I'm a mom, a grandmother. Now I'm an empty nester. My family moved to Chattanooga when I was 11, so I consider Chattanooga my home. I left in '88 and I accidentally stayed gone for 30 years. I left to go to pharmacy school. Anyway, I moved back 3 years ago, and I'm in a new phase of my life. As I mentioned, I'm an empty nester, so I have a lot of time on my hands, and I've been getting more and more involved, and this is one of the areas that I landed, and I'm so glad that I did. So I was a pharmacist by trade, but I haven't done that in decades. I was a stay-at-home mom, and I started a small business about 10 years ago, but one of the biggest passions in my life kind of happened, or fell into my lap, happened to me with my first adult role, which was as a teen mom. I got pregnant in 11th grade and I got married. And that taught me so many lessons, not the least of which was the importance for advocating for and empowering women and teens. And so my passion ever since has been to be an advocate for teens and for women. But again, I'm a newbie working with the Women's Advocacy Fund, the Women's Fund, and the Advocacy Committee of the Women's Fund. And I've just recently started working with them. So I am learning all of this. I'm learning things tonight, probably with a lot of you who are on live or who might watch the replay. So I'm going to share with you how you can act on what you can learn. And we're going to start with talking about what you can do from home. You have a lot of options on what you can do from home. And the nice thing is that you also have flexibility on when you can do it. So a lot of people who have kids at home, I'm watching people who have babies at home, and and time is limited. So there are a lot of things that you can do. The important thing is to reach out to your legislators. A lot of them hear very little from their constituents on many issues. On some bills, your legislators might only hear from 10 people or fewer. So when you give something your voice, either in favor, for, or against a bill, sometimes that can really make a big difference because they're not hearing from very many people. So what are your options when you're advocating from home? You can write postcards, you can make phone calls, you can write emails. You can also start petitions. That apparently takes a lot of work. I've never done that. I'm not going to talk about that tonight. Tonight, I'm just going to really talk about the basics of postcards and phone calls and emails, because those are the main actions that you can take from home. So the basics of all of those things are very similar. You want to be polite. So you're going to use the proper title for the person that you're reaching out to, which is huge. You want to introduce yourself with your name, your city, and your zip code, because they want to know that they're hearing from someone that they represent. You want to include information about the bill or topic issue that you're reaching out to them about, a brief summary, the title of the bill, if it's applicable, the number of that bill. You want to include facts about the bill or about the issue. You want to include what you want them to do, and then how and when you're going to follow up on your interaction with them. It's important to be brief and to the point, and to be polite and to be truthful. Some organizations that you work with, or some people that you work with, might give you a script. I've had this happen with me. And while it's important not to change the facts on the script, it is important to have words that I think are genuine to you. So you might change the verbiage a little bit to make it sound more genuine, especially if you're going to be on the phone with someone, so that it sounds like words that would come out of your mouth. The key things to note for each of these things, with postcards, obviously, you're going to have very little room to write much of a message, but you can make a big impact still. And you can also make a big impact with the image that's chosen. If you're not given postcards, if you get to choose yours, you can choose an image that's going to make a big impact on the legislator. So you can just imagine capturing their attention with that. For phone calls, you might actually have the opportunity to speak to a legislative assistant, and that's okay. There are legislative assistants that are in charge of issues. And if you get on the phone with them, they actually have a lot of control over the legislator's schedule and who gets in front of them and who gets to meet with them. So if you're wanting to schedule a brief meeting or a brief phone call, talking to the legislative assistant can make a big impact. You just need to be prepared and have your notes in front of you and really know your issue. So, what Monika was saying, know your issue. What Kaylin was saying, know your why. All of those things come into play. Know why this is impactful to you, and having a personal story, having a personal involvement is great, but it's also not necessary. I think one of the things that has helped me throughout my adult life started with me having a personal experience, and then letting me realize how many people in how many different situations didn't have their own voice. Back to my topic. Sorry, I was trying not to get off topic. When you write emails, you have a little bit more room, and you can personalize your information a little bit more. You can include an anecdote or an instance in which someone that you know or someone that you've heard of, a real story about someone who's been impacted. So you can include that information. You still want to keep it kind of brief, and you might be tempted to attach, to include attachments with additional information. Those are rarely opened, apparently. So you can also offer to give more information if it's warranted in the future. The big thing is to know where to find your legislator. And in Tennessee, that's super easy. You go to capitol.tn.gov. There's a box for the Senate. There's a box for the House. You can click on either of those. You can click on the speaker. You can click on members. You can click on committees and find whoever you need. Also on the right side of that page, you can enter your personal your address and be led to your particular legislator. Most importantly, I would just say, don't be afraid to get involved. I was afraid for a while, and I've found the people that know how to do this. Choose an issue that's meaningful to you. Find others who feel the same and team up with them. Ask for help for people who've done this for a while, from people who have more experience, and use your voice.
All right, I think that leaves it to me. Thank you so much, Leanne. It's been good to have you joining us in the Advocacy Committee recently.
Thank you.
So I want to talk a little bit about actions you can take on the Hill. We've talked about how you can learn for yourself, ways to share information with others, and then what kind of action or advocacy you can do from home. But another thing is, a lot of what happens in our legislature in Tennessee law happens up at the Capitol, on the Capitol Hill. And so honestly, when I, a couple of years ago, got to go to the Women's Day on the Hill, it was, I would say it shifted my perspective on just the whole political government system. I went up with, there were probably, 14 of us or something that went up. It was like the last thing we did, the last social thing we did before COVID, like really made us not do any, like the next day, like everything shut down. But nonetheless, I got to meet a whole bunch of senators and representatives and talk with them. And it was, I was really surprised by the way that they were interested in talking to us and like listened to us and gave us some genuine responses. That sometimes things, I remember one senator at first was like, well, I don't know if I could really support that if this and this, and which is what we want to hear, because we don't want them just to be like, oh yeah, I appreciate you sharing that information with me. No, it's great when they engage with you, because then you can say, well, actually, it's not that way, or things like that. And for me, I think it took a lot of these representatives off a pedestal for me. And I just these are just people, and I remember that I had seen, I remember seeing Todd Gardenhire and Bo Watson and events. I remember being at a school board meeting and Gardenhire, Senator Gardenhire was in the room, and I was like, oh my gosh, that's the senator. And now I would not have that same, and now I'm just okay, he's just a person, And I think that was really good for me personally in realizing, I think it just made it more accessible, the system, by having that face-to-face. When we go, there's some tips here about how you might go about this. If you can set up, during legislative season, it's possible for you and some of your friends, or you and some other people from the Women's Fund, to set up time to go and meet with legislators. It's great if you can meet particularly with your own legislators. But you might find a friend or two that that are in different places around Hamilton County, and you could visit together, and you got a big group, but at least one of you is a constituent, right? But you don't want to have 10 people trying to crowd into. A lot of times their offices are not that large, and it would just be a little too much if you had more than about 3 or 4 people. Yeah, and you want to have somebody, you want to know what you're going to say when you go in. A lot of times we had very it's you have a specific amount of time. And I remember we went into one office, and they were like, I know you're supposed to have 15 minutes, but I have 7 minutes, type of thing. And we're like, okay, it's not go in there, we're going to order some coffee and tea and sit for an hour. It's usually a pretty, get to the point, but hopefully they're listening. One pagers, so you can bring with you a one pager on a bill that you're advocating for, with it, just really the bullet points about what do you need to know about this bill. And yeah, they just kind of Leanne was alluding to, unless they're asking you for a lot of detailed information, those highlights, the real, what's the title of this essay, is really what they're looking for. yeah, they just don't have time because there's like there's just so much going on. We've only got, our legislature's only open part of the year, so there's a ton happening in that short part of the year. Yeah, if you, in the end, if you feel comfortable, try and get a picture for social media, that's fun. You get a picture. We have a picture of us when we all, like the whole big group of us that divided and conquered, if you will. But that's a great way to remind other people about like the advocacy they can be doing, to talk about the issues that are important to you. And you can tag that senator or representative and like remind them about what they said to you that they would be supportive of, right? We're like, hey, thank you so much, Senator Gardenhire, for your support of women's issues this year. Like, right? And then, so with that, like the other thing, I just, I'm trying to think if there's anything. I think that was pretty much what I wanted to say. Like, I just encourage. Oh, I know. The other thing I think that talking to these people and realizing that they're just people is also like, you all can run for office. You could go to the Hill and be a representative or a senator. And so, I think getting involved in the advocacy committee and getting involved in advocacy in the Women's Fund, I hope will be a path to more women serving in our legislature. And this is a great entryway to that. The last thing, and Janine says, almost every rep in Tennessee has a staffer watching for them on social media. Yeah. Also meeting the staffers is like a really great thing. So, there are people that I got to meet then, and it's been a couple of years now, and I haven't been back, but like in the following year, I was surprised, like I'd noted some of their names and they'd remember me. I'd say, hey, I got to meet you back with the Women's Fund. Okay, oh yeah, I remember you. And maybe it's because I was like the only man in the big group of women, but like still, it was kind of, they were friendly, and I was able to like make that connection. And it's really so much about relationships. So it is about relationships. And with that said, I've added some to that. Sometimes the Hill comes to you. And I believe Kaylin alluded to this earlier. Let me find I had a link here, but there's going to be, Bo Watson is hosting a series of education town halls in the coming month, each week on Wednesday. Actually, tonight is the first one. And I'm going to find the link that I seem to have misplaced, and I'll put it in the chat in a minute. But especially if Bo Watson is your senator, I mean, I know COVID's crazy right now, so definitely consider that your safety and precautions on those things. But if you determine that it's safe to go for you, it would be an opportunity for you to meet Bo Watson and like introduce yourself and say that you're a constituent, say that you're involved in the Women's Fund. And then when you send that email, you can say, hey, I met you, and like I appreciated you coming to talk to us about education. An issue that's really important to me right now is this, and that's how you can start building that relationship. So that's kind of what I wanted to say about taking action on the Hill. And I'm going to see if I can find that link. And I think I'm passing it to Rachel.
Yeah. Thank you, Teo. That was wonderful, Teo. The opportunity to go to the Hill is such a neat chance to go, and there's a lot of giggling as you try to figure out what you're about to say when you go into a legislator's office. So I feel like it's a really wonderful and supportive opportunity for beginners to go, but then to learn that your legislators are just humans who are there to listen to constituents. So yeah. Okay, well, I just wanted to give a quick little teaser for the upcoming Advocacy Institute before we unrecord the session and open it up for questions. But basically, the final Advocacy Institute is on Thursday, February 17th at 12 p.m. It'll also be on Zoom. This Advocacy Institute will be special because we will be talking about the Women's Fund's legislative agenda, legislative priorities for 2022. So you'll get to hear about, for instance, the bill that Monika talked about, and let us know about with regards to economic abuse. But please join us for that session, and I will, if we want to turn off